Have you ever wanted to jump into a seasonal activity on a harder difficulty only to be met with the realization that there is no matchmaking? I have, and probably so have you, but what is the reasoning behind this and why is it not consistent? A comment from DMG around 4 years ago may shed some light on the matter. It was in response to a comment that suggested that players could complete so many Legend Lost sectors before they can access Legend matchmaking for activities. His reply, while not a direct response, does give us some insight into why. DMG's main comments were the following. Inexperienced players often need the LFG aspect so group leaders can guide them through what mods to equip and the steps to success. It would be awkward to have 6 players without the correct champ mods or the weapons required. Veteran players can bypass champion requirements. And players could easily become frustrated and quit if an activity is taking too long. Okay, so what we're going to do now is break down each of those points. Starting with the first point, new players need LFG group leaders to guide them through what mods to run and how to achieve whatever they're attempting. Now, don't get me wrong, there are definitely a lot of very helpful players, they're called chirpers and they don't expect you to know a thing most of the time, but they are not the norm. If you join a typical LFG for a non-match-made activity, the leader and other players likely expect a certain level of knowledge and skill. Take a Grandmaster Nightfall for example. This is an activity where not only are you expected to know how to stay alive, you're also expected to know what champions are in the Nightfall, or if not that, then at the very least know what to bring when you're told that the Grandmaster has barrier and overload champions. It would be great if the typical player was accommodating and more than happy to spend the time to educate, but that's just not reality unfortunately. People just want to go in and out without wasting time in between runs having to do the job of the game, which is to educate. This might sound like me saying that I want matchmaking for Grandmaster Nightfalls, and believe me, I do not. I'll elaborate on this a little later on. Onto DMG's next point, it would definitely be very awkward to have 6 players not running the required champion mods, but this reply of his was from 4 years ago. With the release of Lightfall back in 2023, certain subclass verbs were made able to stun specific champions, and there are a multitude of exotic weapons that can do the same. In this day and age, you'll definitely have enough people in an uncoordinated team to cover the 3 champions. Hell, with enough damage, you can just brute force all of the champions. This leads us into his next point. We are so strong currently, and we're only going to get stronger in Edge of Fate. A lot of the time, you can just ignore champion requirements, with the exception of maybe overload champions as they can be quite annoying. I don't think champions being the reason as to why there is no matchmaking in some activities is really entirely fair. Previously, they were definitely a hurdle, especially in the early GM days, but now, for an unprepared team, yes, they can still be a hurdle, but mostly they're just a nuisance or a deterrent. I'm not worried about champions in a GM because they're champions. I'm worried because they hit hard just like every single enemy. And his last point. Players could quit if an activity takes too long. I don't think we need to say much about this, other than the fact that this already happens in match-made and non-match-made activities. It's a null point, especially since with match-made activities, empty spaces can be filled. So to summarize, it seems that the main reason, at least 4 years ago, is that Bungie does not want to throw new players into the deep end, spoiling both their experience and the experience of veteran players. And I think that's fair, but it's no longer 4 years ago and we can do better. In fact, Bungie already has matchmaking for some harder seasonal content, specifically the Breach executable activity from Episode Echoes. From my personal experience, there wasn't any noticeable change in difficulty when going in with a match-made team versus a pre-made team, and champions weren't an issue even though I didn't prepare for them. I didn't notice anyone leaving either, but something worth noting is that it did, on average, take longer when I had a match-made team. Of course, the complexity and difficulty of Breach executable is very basic compared to something like the Nether, so what might work in one activity may not work in the other. I think a good middle ground could be that, for seasonal activities without built-in matchmaking, partway through the season, matchmaking would be enabled. This would give players time to get used to an activity before they can matchmake into the expert version. Putting a requirement of needing to complete part of the seasonal quest would probably have to be required so that a new player who starts towards the end of a season can't just jump straight into the expert mode now that matchmaking is enabled. Looking at matchmaking across the game, I cannot see why expert matchmaking is disabled for activities without return to orbit mechanics. I do understand why Expert Nether and Grandmaster Nightfalls have none, as they do have a revive system which can end with you returning to orbit, but any activity that will just send you back to the start of an encounter or section should have it enabled from the very start. This excludes dungeons and raids as they require communication and coordination which you just aren't going to find with randoms. The trade-off for having matchmaking is that a match-made team will probably take longer to complete an activity than a pre-made team, but that's a pretty fair trade to me. This would greatly benefit older activities as it can be very hard to find pre-made teams for them. Take Empire Hunts for example. For the common player, there is no real reason to do these on Expert Plus difficulties, so the LFG channels in a Discord server like Destiny 2 LFG are completely dead. As I am writing this script, the last LFG post about Empire hunts in general was just under 24 hours ago, and the last LFG post specifically mentioning a harder difficulty, which has no matchmaking, was 2 days and a half ago. Fireteam Finder does not have any listings for Empire hunts either. You have to jump through an awful lot of hoops to get a team to play a mission with, which is just kill stuff and move forwards. And you might not even find a team at all. Now, let's just go back to DMG's comments about champion mods again. I think at some point, we just need to stop babying players. Look at Trials of Osiris for example. It has matchmaking enabled and doesn't hold the player's hand in a literal sense. It's much easier to unintentionally throw in Trials than it is in PvE. If Bungie really, and I mean really, wants to ensure that players bring appropriate champion mods into Expert Plus content, then all they need to do is flash in your face that you are not covering all the champions. And they already have a system for this. On your character screen to the right of your kinetic slot weapon, there are 3 icons for the respective champions. If you are not covering that champion, then it is grayed out. They could adopt this system so that when you have selected an activity and all that's left to do is launch, it would show what champions each player is covering on their banner, and then somewhere alongside the activity info would show what champions are covered by the team combined. This could be tailored to each activity as well. If an activity only has barrier and overload champions, then it would not show whether you have unstoppable champions covered because that's irrelevant. I think at the very least, Bungie needs to experiment with harder difficulty matchmaking. It's been 4 years since they last spoke about it, which was really just them saying why there isn't any, but times have changed. Back in 2022, Bungie announced that sunsetting has been sunset. All content currently in the game, outside of seasons and episodes, remain in the game. This means that the amount of activities will grow, and as they get older, it will become harder and harder to find a pre-made team. Matchmaking reduces that challenge by pulling all the players interested in an activity together instead of forcing them to go through external LFGs or Fireteam Finder, which we've already seen not working. That's it from me. Thanks for watching. If you've got any thoughts on the matter, then I would love to hear them. Otherwise, have a good day.